Hello and welcome. Before I get started talking about the mechanics of this build, my experiences with it, how it plays, and what I've done on it, I would like to say that I am explicitly not advising people to attempt to copy this build. I think Penance Brand is really cool, but I went for an extremely high-end setup that relied on knowing a lot about crafting, because that is what I personally find enjoyable about the game. And I hope I don't come off as that asshole who says, oh look, here's this shiny thing that you can't have, because that's not my intent. I just don't want people to be misled, because it is very easy for this build to look very easy to play and very strong by how I am playing it after having geared it and after having put in all the effort. It is going to be a lot harder for a player on an average budget of say 20 to 40 exalts to replicate those results, as I've put in, I would say between 50 and 150, but let's just say 100. Again, I've crafted a lot of my gear. I don't know exactly how much I've spent. I know I've spent over 30 exalts on Add Remove Life alone. And so keeping that in mind, I am just very hesitant because I would rather that everyone watching my video sees the build, sees it for what it is, and gets inspired to make their own variants and their own ideas, some of which will work on a cheaper budget, than attempts to copy mine and runs into frustrations. Because when I'm making a build for myself, I'm not thinking about how much does it cost or how easy is it for other people to play. I am just making it as something I have fun with. And that's really what this build is. Things like my Ball Lightning Miner, or potentially other future builds, I will make with other people in mind. But this one was mostly just for me, and I really liked it, and I thought it was cool, so I want to share it. I honestly don't think it's perfect. I think that there's a lot of room to experiment with playing a Trickster, or playing a Hierophant, and looking into that, or potentially scaling the build in some different ways. If you do try to make a build that is similar to mine, keep in mind that if you're missing resists on really any of the suffixes, including the jewels, you probably won't be capped. If you're missing cast speed on anything except for one of the rings, you won't be able to reach 20 stacks. So it will be difficult, especially given that Assassin doesn't have the best innate defenses, so you also need to scale your defenses up, which adds just one more thing to do. That said, I do encourage you to play Penance Brand. I think it's a really cool skill with a lot of scaling. I just think this specific build is more of something to be observed rather than emulated. Alright, now that I've scared everyone off, I'm going to start talking about the individual mechanics of a build leverages, how I got them working, and how I found out about them. I started this build because I had seen several other people play Penance Brand and have very mixed success. There are of course the Delver builds, and quite a few friends played it and found that it cleared very well, but had Z DPS on single target. At first, people were using Arcanist Brand Wave of Conviction to solve this, but after Wave of Conviction was fixed, to no longer delete things, the damage fell off, and it was a lot harder. So my goal in making this was build a Penance Brand character that is strong enough to boss, has well-rounded defenses so I don't hate myself, and continues to clear at the rate that Penance Brand is known for. The first thing I found is I needed to use Holy Conquest to smooth out the clear. The reason I need to use Holy Conquest is because if I put a Penance Brand on the target and have to wait until the end for it to go boom, or have to manually trigger it with Brand Recall, this slows down the clear a lot and leaves large windows where enemies are free to run at me or potentially kill me. Now, I could have just said, alright, well, I'm just not running any maps with turbo, and that would have worked well enough. But I don't like solutions like that. I don't like my build having extra things I can't run on my maps. I already can't run Ellie Reflect. I already probably shouldn't run no regen or no leech. I don't want to add turbo as something that I also probably shouldn't do. Then I found Holy Conquest, which allows me to really focus on the single target because the brands will automatically jump on activation every 0.3 seconds, which actually means every 3 activations with my activation speed. The explosions at around 3 to 4 energy, depending on, of course, how many adjacent enemies got energized, etc., was plenty to blow up packs in everything except for Tier 19 and 100% Delirious Tier 16 maps. On top of using Holy Conquest, I did focus in heavily on my clusters to increase my cast speed, increase the damage taken by branded enemies, and also fill out my resistances in life, which I felt the build was sorely lacking in. It was also a very convenient way to add Life Leech via Doryani's Lesson. The second thing was scaling most of my damage via +1 gems on my weapon, shield, and amulet. This, combined with my helmet, gives me a powerful pseudo 7-link main damage. My helmet is, honestly, a work of art. It's not perfect, but I put a ton of blood, sweat, and tears into it, and I'm very proud of it. If I were to do it again, I might experiment with stacking less plus gems and more fizz as extra lightning, which would allow me to scale the enemy's explode chest. This would solve any of the damage issues that I was occasionally having while clearing tier 19 maps or 100% delirious tier 16s. Also, putting on a headhunter in place of my belt would similarly solve these issues, although resist capping of a headhunter would probably be a nightmare. The third thing was getting to 10 hits per second on my Penance Brand. Penance Brand deals 150% more damage for each stack outside of a first, so if you reach 20, the explosion will deal almost 3,000% more damage. The thing that I found was often neglected by other people's Penance Brand builds was the fact that Penance Brand has a maximum duration set by whatever your increases and reductions to the attached duration is, and a cast time. So people would get it to, oh, well, this does 20 stacks because my brand has a 1.5 second duration and it ticks at 8 casts a second. And they were neglecting the cast speed of the brand itself. When I factored that in, I got to a 0.1 second activation time, or 10 activations per second, on a 1.2 second duration, with roughly a 250 to 300 millisecond cast time. Meaning, if I cast Penance Brand, the first one will tick 12 times, adding 12 energy to the enemy. The second one will tick roughly 9 times, or 8 if I'm slightly slower on my second recast. What this means is I will get the full 20 stacks and then it will explode. You want to always make sure your duration is as low as possible because you want more damage, more explosions. There is probably a little more nuance that I'm giving this credit for. You can probably increase the damage significantly, use Indigon, and have a longer exploding brand that hits much harder on a single hit basis, but that would be an entirely different build and potentially an entirely different video that I may do in a future league. For now, with this build, the short version is you want as low a duration as possible while still getting to 20 stacks in your duration, while then maximizing the damage as much as possible. Now, onto the gear. Normally, I would just highlight the most important items in the build, but honestly, all of the items are important here and allow the build to function. Many of them are straightforward and easier to understand, so I will talk about those in less depth, but I am going to highlight some of the more complex ones, talk about what they do in the build, and what I did to make them. Starting with this beast, my helmet. This is the bulk of my build's damage, and honestly, the most fun thing I've crafted in a long time. It is a pseudo 7-link, I'm estimating here, but first of all, it's a 6-link helmet. Gems socketed in this item, i.e. Penance Brand, are supported by Conquest and Hypothermia. They also have 3% to critical strike chance, which is basically increased critical strike support, and 50% of fizz as extra lightning. So now we're up into 7-link territory, and the +1 gems pushes it up over the top for massive damage. I crafted it by taking a Shaper Elder base. I would have liked an enchanted one, but at the time there were literally no appropriate eye level enchanted bases on either Shaper or Elder Hubris. I rolled it with an Essence of Insanity until I got Fizz as extra lightning and concentrated effect. I then used the Garden to finish the crafting, add Remove Cold for the Hypothermia, Caster, add Remove to reroll to 3% for the crit. Then I cleaned up my prefixes, did add Remove Life. I was hoping for T1, but I burned around 13 Exalted Orbs worth of add Remove Life and said, you know what, this is close enough. I give up. And there you have it. Craft +1 gems, and you're done. You have a big boom energy helmet. Second, the shield. It started with +1 gems, life gain on block, and spell block. I then did Augment Caster as a suffix to get the cast speed. If I had gotten the Helm Enchant, I would not have needed the cast speed here. I could have gone with Spell Crit. If I had slightly better cast speed on my weapon, I also could have gone for another suffix either here or elsewhere on gear. Following that, I did Suffixes Cannot Be Changed to not remove the life on block, and add Remove Life until I hit T2. Again, I was hoping to get T1, but I put around 10 Exalted Orbs worth of add Remove Life into this and didn't hit it. Then I did Augment Life, Remove Defense until I hit the Hybrid Life, which luckily I hit within a few tries. The shield is important because the build uses Glancing Blows and Life on Block as a defensive damage mitigation / recovery mechanic to aid with the defenses because it's kind of hard to get a lot of defenses that actually keep you from dying on an assassin. Thirdly, this ring, which probably looks a little strange, because why is it Elder? What's going on? It's Elder purely to enable the spell damage bonus from Mark of a Shaper. You could roll Crit Multi as a suffix in place of a cast speed. I chose not to because, again, I was trying to get as much cast speed as possible to smooth out the gameplay of the build, and I didn't get a perfect roll on my weapon, but it was too late in the crafting process to go back and redo that without risking removing the Tier 1 crit or one of the prefixes. The conductivity is, of course, there because that's the curse I'm going to use, and I'm not corrupting my gloves until I hit Ellie weakness. Assassin's Mark could also be used, but that would require a Shaper base, and that changes the crafting process entirely. While you could do that, keep in mind that because this build has so much crit scaling, you might actually overcap crit and not benefit as much from Assassin's Mark. The Chaos Res, of course, Chaos caps me for Divine Flesh. For prefixes, the life is important. The damage and damage to spells are really just to round out the damage and enable the use of Cinder Swallow, which I did use it in some of the tier 19 maps. Unfortunately, I don't have footage of those. Aside of that, I didn't really use it too much. I didn't feel it was necessary. It kind of felt like if I'm killing enough things that the Cinder Swallow recovers my life, I'm not really in danger of dying. When I'm in danger of dying, it's because things are not dead. So I'd rather just keep the current flask setup or use something a little bit more defensive like a Rumi's. Fourth is the chess piece, which is actually something that if I were doing this build again, I might change. It's using Enemies Explode to clean up corpses and add a little bit of damage in the higher tier maps. And then the Fizz taken as cast to act as almost a pseudo-fortify effect to convert over 15% of my Fizz damage taken to something that I take greatly reduced damage from having 85% Chaos Res. So you can kind of think of this as 13.5% less physical damage taken. If I'd used a Val Regalia or another base, I would have needed All-Res on my ring in place of the cast speed. And in theory, if I do that, I might be able to juice a little bit of extra damage out of a build, as I would have had 2 extra skill points, and also I would have potentially been able to save a little bit of resist somewhere, as I could have used a resist implicit enchant on my chest. If I were doing that again, I might do that, but I had made the Astral Plate towards the very end of the build's gearing, and I did not want to go back and recraft that many items when I felt like I was kind of finished with the build and overall happy with its performance. The gloves add cast speed, Culling Strike, which rounds out our damage, resistances, and fully converts the damage of Penance Brand from physical to lightning. It should be noted, this is the one place where spending 10 exalts on Add Remove Life did pay off, and I ended up getting the T1 affixes that I so badly wanted. The boots provide Tailwind, prevent me from being frozen, add life, and round out resists. The amulet provides +2 gems for a significant boost in damage and some crit. This was a surprisingly difficult thing to craft. I guess the waiting on crit multi is not quite as good as I initially thought, and I could recraft it, focusing a little bit more on Fizz as extra in place of the plus gems. The belt is mainly there to carry life and resistances, since it isn't a headhunter and therefore can't carry my damage. The regular jewels, or regular jewel, focus in on providing cast speed. The Thread of Hope is there for glancing blows and Runebinder, and everything else is just incidental and convenient, and the Watcher's Eye is there for damage. The main skill is Penance Brand. The supports I'm using are to boost the damage as much as possible, increase the cast speed, and still allow it to shock enemies because it has a fairly significant single hit. The reason I'm using Inspiration support is 1, it's surprisingly high damage, and 2, the mana got a little bit awkward while I wasn't. My secondary skill is Wave of Conviction. I was experimenting with Orb of Storms, which is much more passive, and a few other things, but ultimately it just felt better to have Wave of Conviction applying my exposure. I've kind of gone back and forth on whether or not I should just handcast it, use Unleash, or use Spell Echo. Unleash and Spell Echo are more damage if I play perfectly, but oftentimes the recursions shorten the Wave of Conviction's range so much that I just miss the enemy anyway. Also, if I am getting that close to point blank the enemy, I am in the danger zone and could potentially die if I misplay. I much prefer the safer playstyle of standing back. Defensively, I am using Tempest Shield for a little bit of extra block, Steel Skin on left click for passive defense. Yes, self-cast would be better, but I have a lot to do already, and it's just one less thing to think about. An Enduring Cry to gain endurance charges, and for extremely strong life recovery. Flame Dash or Smoke Mine for movement, depending on your preference. Note, if you're using your Steel Skin on left click, you should probably just use Flame Dash, as to me, Smoke Mine only really feels good if you are running Detonate on left click. You could also use Immortal Call in place of Steel Skin. It felt worse to me, especially with it going off randomly, especially with it eating my endurance charges. But again, that's kind of a play it by feel. Depending on the content, it may be better, it may be worse. Overall, the build has felt great to play. It's a super smooth mapper. You can prelay your brands if you're doing gardening. You can prelay your brands during boss phases. And you can throw your brands to the edge of your screen to give the build surprising amounts of reach in killing packs while mapping, or delving, or dealing with dangerous enemies in general. I've done almost all content the game has to offer. I've done delving, up to around depth 500-ish, I think. I haven't really focused too hard on delve. I did a 100% Delirious tier 16, which I have footage of. I did a couple tier 19s, which unfortunately I don't have footage of. Cortex, Oshabi, Crystal King, Cirrus, Shaper, Uber Elder. I did a delve boss. The only thing that I have not done is Crystal King because I'm pretty sure he's just shy and hiding from me at this point. Nothing I did felt bad. In the end, there was a little bit of a damage drop-off in the especially Delirious Tier 16 map, but also a little bit in the Tier 19. I was actually surprised that the 100% Delirious Tier 16 damage-wise felt worse than the Tier 19 maps. If I were to do all of this again, I would consider optimizing a little bit more for the Explodey chest, potentially using Fizz converted to Lightning on my Watcher's Eye, and getting 50% conversion gloves, maybe in place of a Culling Strike. Though this would be less overall damage, it would likely perform better as the high health enemies exploding will add a lot to the clear. Also, knowing myself and being completely honest, if I was going to hard farm 100% Delirious Tier 16s or Tier 19 maps, most likely what I'd do is I would just throw on a Headhunter. With any Fizz-based skill, the auras from Headhunter are absolutely insane, especially if you are crit, and that would solve absolutely all of my problems. Going into this, I had pretty low expectations. I'd heard a lot of mixed things from people about Penance Brand, but I was pleasantly surprised at how smoothly the build bossed. It really felt like I was very safe because I could put up my brands on an enemy, and then I could run around and do whatever I wanted and think about, what is the boss going to do to kill me? I don't need to worry about my damage, it's just going to go boom and blow the boss away. And so I did a lot of putting the brands up, running around while they exploded. I didn't feel like I was tied down to standing in one place for a long time and casting. I didn't really feel like I was tied down to playing close range or far range. It overall felt very responsive, very smooth, and very fun. Also, watching a brand jump between packs, watching everything explode, real satisfying. I think Penance Brand is a finicky skill, but it's very strong. If you're on a budget, you'll probably have a better time with Storm Brand. Penance Brand will scale better in the long term, but you need to put in the time and you need to put in the gear. I think if I were to do this again, there's two variants that I might play instead. One would be to sacrifice my defenses, probably hate myself, but live with it because I get to do an Eternity Shroud build. And it's been a long time since I've looked at a skill and gone, yeah, that could be fun with Eternity Shroud. Or I would lean more heavily into the enemies explode aspect, putting things like Fizz as extra on my amulet instead of +1 gems, putting things like Fizz as extra on my weapon instead of +1 gems, and fully converting that enemies explode into lightning instead of it being around 75% Fizz, 25% lightning. Again, I think if I were doing that, I would probably lean into it even further and put on the Headhunter and use it as a high-end Speedy Boy mapping build. As a bosser and as a delver, I am very satisfied with how Penance Brand came out. I absolutely would play this skill again. I would absolutely play this again on an assassin. I think Hierophant or Trickster may be higher quality of life and lower damage, so I'm potentially going to try one of those in a future league as well. If you want to see exactly what I did with a build, feel free to check out my PoE profile or check the path of building that I've put in the link down below. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this build showcase. Again, I don't particularly advise that people copy this. I suggest you adapt this, take some mechanics from what I'm doing, and make your own build. Throughout this video, I've been using clips of the Penance Brand gameplay. If you would like to see more Penance Brand of this build, clearing maps, killing bosses in a little more detail, with less stuff on screen and less commentary, please let me know in the comments down below, as I can put together a playlist and post that. Normally I only do that for build guides, but you know what, I have all the footage, so if you're interested, just let me know. Thank you, I hope you've enjoyed, and as always, stay sane, Exiles.